All right, we are back here with another JS Speed tech tip. This one's just going to be about just making basic wire-to-wire connections, the different options that are out there, some preferences for you to make sure you get a good solid connection that's going to last the lifetime of a vehicle here. So first we're going to get into just explaining the few differences between them all, and I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the basic tooling that I have here to use to kind of show you how to make some basic connections here. And then first up, we're going to have our pretty typical, you're going to see these in a lot of parts stores, a lot of kits you're going to get for some of your wiring, and these are kind of PVC-coated butt splices. And I'm not a fan of these. I don't use these. I had a hard time even finding these around to even put them in the video because I just don't use them. They're bulky. I find the material of these newer ones to be quite thin and quite difficult to actually make a decent crimp with these days, so I typically kind of just avoid them altogether. But saying that, if you're on the side of the road, you need to make a wire-to-wire connection, and you have this in a pretty basic crimper, you can make yourself at least a decent connection for something temporary. Won't go into much about these because like I said, I just don't use them. From there, you're gonna have, you'll see a lot of these days on people's stuff and at part stores, and these are just pretty much the same thing as before, but these ones have a heat shrinkable ends on them. So do the same thing, crimp your wire, get your heat gun out and melt these down. It kind of makes a weather tight seal around the wire. Decent splice. The only thing I have a gripe with these ones is the sheer bulk of these. Once they're shrunk down, they don't really lay nice in a harness if you're trying to make a nice kind of smooth harness. So again, these ones make a good decent seal if you're kind of making a weatherproof connection on the outside of a vehicle. These are pretty decent for that. From there, we kind of move into what you'd call a bare butt splice, and there's a couple different versions of these. These ones, which I use a lot, as you can see, that there's no seam in them. I find these ones are great because you don't have to have your crimper kind of lined up with the opposing side of the seam to make a decent crimp. I find that these ones just make a better splice all around. I do use these ones a fair amount. And then obviously you'll take your wire, make your crimp on both sides, cover it with a piece of shrink tube, and then make yourself a nice seal connection like this, but it'll end up being a lot narrower just because the shrink tube won't be as bulky as the shrink that's on these ones. Then from there, we have, these are a bit more unique, probably a bit more harder to find, where it's what they call a step down or a step up. So on this one, we have our 10-12 gauge, and on the other side, we have our 14-16 gauge. This one is 22 on the one side, and then you're kind of 18 on the other side. And then these ones are good if you're gonna have a single 14 going in, you want two 14s out, type of setup. I don't use these a ton, but they are a unique problem solver if you're trying to join multiple wires to one connection. And then the other splice you guys probably don't see a lot often is a parallel crimp. And these ones are definitely my favorite style of bare splice, where you'll take both ends of your wire and actually put it into the splice together, and then this way you only got one crimp to do, and now you're not relying on the quality of the crimp itself to actually make continuity between the conductor, where the conductor on the parallel crimp is squished together in the crimp. Like again, one crimp instead of two, and you're not relying on the conductivity of the splice itself to make the good connection on a normal butt splice. So you'll see this a lot more in a OE setup, where almost every splice that I've ever seen in an OE vehicle is a parallel splice instead of a butt splice. It's the splice that I pretty much use on everything at this point. I don't do a lot of butt splices anymore. It's pretty much all a parallel crimp. And saying that, this would be what most would consider an OE splice crimp. if you were to cut apart most harnesses, you're going to see kind of an open barrel splice clip like this. I'm going to show you how to actually make these connections using an open barrel crimper that I've got here. This one actually is just the, if you've done any American Auto Wire kits, this is actually their open splice tool for doing the Dell 556 series terminals. I find it works great on doing these splice clips. And you don't even have to find the splice clips. Here I have just a generic weather pack terminal. I actually use these a lot to make splice clips out of. I'll just cut the seal portion of the crimp off and then cut the actual terminal end off. And then at that point, you're left with the lovely splice crimp. These do take a little bit getting used to actually crimp them up, but once you get kind of into the rhythm of how to hold the wire together and hold the splice together, I actually like it a lot. This is just another similar type of terminal. We're just got a splice you can, again, cut off both ends and get yourself a nice little splice clip to use. Cheap, easy. Most parts stores are going to have this kind of stuff kicking around if they don't have these. And like I said, they're relatively inexpensive that way to buy them and turn your own little connectors into splice clips. So I'm going to get into it here. Here I just have some basic 18 gauge TXL wire. I'm going to strip off my ends. Now we got our connection we're going to make here. Grab our splice clip. Get it set up in the jaws. It's difficult to do over the, while trying to film, but we got our both ends in there. We're going to crimp it down. As you can see, we got a nice, what I love about this the most is you can see that the actual thickness of our crimp is not much bigger than the insulation size. So now when you recover this with a bit of heat shrink, it lays nice and flat in a bundle of wires. You get yourself a nice flat, no bulky harness anywhere we need to go to make a splice somewhere. That's why I pretty much always choose this type of crimp. I know it's a bit more work than just making a butt connector, but in the end, you're going to have yourself a much nicer connection. And as I said, this is what I use the most when I'm joining wires together. Saying that, I know most people won't have this set of crimpers. They're a little bit of money, but I find they're worth it if you're going to do a lot of wiring. Like I said, these are from American Auto Wire, but there's other versions of these online you can find. And then for making your basic splice connectors, honestly, there's so many different versions of these. These are just an old Snap-on pair I've had forever. Still in my toolbox, still use them a bunch. I can show you here just how to make a decent crimp. So I've got some 12 gauge TXL here. Now I'm gonna put the crimp in, grab our tool. Now we're going to be using the indent part here. There's two different kind of crimps in here. This is for your non-insulated. This is for your insulated connectors. Obviously, I don't use that one very often, but this one I use the most. So line it up, get nice and centered. Give it a good swish. Strip our other side. Grab our crimp, tool, give it a crimp. Kind of missed there, I was looking at the camera, but what I always like to do after a crimp, give everything a good tug. I'm pulling as hard as I possibly can here and I can't pull it apart. This is the time to check your crimp, not when it's in the car, not when it's covered in heat shrink. Do it now, because this is the easiest time you're going to be able to get to it. Because after this, and it's buried up under a dash somewhere, and you got a loose connection you can't find, I always stress to everyone that's doing their own wiring, please just grab and tug your crimps every time you do one. And that's basically going to get yourself a nice butt splice here. I'll have no problems with that connection once a bit of heat shrink applied to it, and away we go. All right, thanks guys. See you soon.